Iran may be ready to resume talks with the West, but under new conditions. Iranian president sets out new criteria for Western nations, highlighting what he called the Western hypocrisy. Is Tehran in a position to dictate new conditions, or are the latest sanctions already biting? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. Setting specific conditions, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad lays down his terms for resuming talks. This comes after the US and its allies slapped Iran with more sanctions, hoping that they will deter Tehran from its nuclear ambitions. They are concerned Tehran is trying to build a nuclear bomb. Iran has denied these claims, saying its nuclear program is only for civilian purposes. Reasserting this position, President Ahmadinejad said he will delay the talks to late August and will talk only to those who clarify their position on some of what he considers key issues.
What's their opinion about the atomic bomb at the hands of the Zionist regime? Anyone who wants to enter talk with us, they should announce, are they for this or against this? And secondly, they should also announce if they want to join and abide by the NPT regulations or not. Now, the third point is, those who want to enter talks with us, they need to announce what are they going after in the talks? What's the purpose of the talks? Do they want to make friends with us, or they want to keep being amicable toward us? Those who want to be our friends will have our own way, and those who want to continue enmity toward us, we will have another way.
Joining me to discuss the topic, in Tehran, Syed Mohammad Morandi, head of North American Studies at Tehran University. In Washington, D.C., Genev Abdu, Iran expert and fellow at the Century Foundation. And in Beirut, Alastair Crook, director and founder of Conflicts Forum. Welcome to the program. Mohammad Morandi, let me start with you. The Iranian president just said that he will delay the talks to punish the West. Punish them from what? And is it really time to actually do this tit-and-tat kind of reaction?
Well, I think what he's trying to do is to ask some very embarrassing questions for Western countries. After all, the United States and its allies have been quiet about the fact that Israel has up to 200 nuclear warheads, and at the same time these countries have refrained from joining the NPT, and the Iranians want to point that out for world public opinion. At the end of the day, of course, Iran feels that it has world public opinion on its side because the Non-Aligned Movement has supported it, the Organization for the Islamic Conference has supported it, and in the recent meeting in New York, 189 countries in the IAEA Non-Proliferation Conference, they signed a declaration calling on Israel to join the NPT, but they did not name Iran. So the Iranians feel that this is a good way to sort of get their revenge upon Western countries who've imposed their will upon the international community.
Well, Genev Abdu, is this really the case, or is it actually a reaction to the fact that the U.S. has imposed some new sanctions on Iran?
Well, I think that this is certainly in reaction to the U.S. imposing sanctions. Congress just passed tougher sanctions last week. And I think that it's an attempt by Iran to divert attention away from the sanctions and the fact that now Iran is under sort of the spotlight of the international community. However, having said that, I'd like to also note that sanctions and ignoring the Tehran Declaration, which Iran signed with Turkey and Brazil, probably was not such a wise idea by the United States, because now Iran may not return to the negotiating table. And I think that at this point it's in everyone's interest for there to be engagement with Iran, for there to be negotiations with Iran, because the alternative is Iran that is more isolated today than it was before, and that could lead to some sort of military attack, which of course is not in the interest of the region.
Well, Alastair Crook, in your mind, why didn't the U.S. give a chance to this Tehran Declaration?
I think because they have been so set on the idea of international sanctions. And in fact, I think there's quite a paradox in that, because in one sense, I don't think anyone really believes that these sanctions are going to bring about a change in policy in Iran. Clearly they're not, and indeed they're probably not going to be very effective sanctions. There are many countries that are not going to join in these sanctions. For a very few countries that might wish to be a part of this, if you like, this coalition of the willing. But even Russia and China, I think, will be quite upset in the way in which it's been taken out of the Security Council. So I think that it's not likely to be very, these sanctions are not likely to be very effective in the first place. And what I think they've done is actually push talks further away, made it much harder, in fact, to have that engagement. Although the last speaker, Sabdo, spoke about the need for engagement, of course, there has been a massive breach of good faith, if you like, by the United States. It gave clear endorsement to the Brazilian president, President Lula, on the terms in which he should negotiate, and then they reneged on those terms and they ignored them.
Well, Syed Morandi, I do understand, considering what just Alistair Crook said, Tehran probably does feel that these sanctions won't harm it, but at the same time, isn't Tehran in a very difficult position in the sense that, yes, it does have some international support, but it also has some souring relations, especially with Russia at the moment?
Well, obviously, the Iranians don't want sanctions, and they would like to have good relations with all countries in the world. But the point is that the Iranians have rights, and that Iran is a very sovereign country. Iran is not like Jordan or Egypt or some other countries of the world that the United States and others consider as client regimes. Iran is an independent country, and therefore the issue of the nuclear program is one of sovereignty. The Iranians believe that as long as they're abiding by international regulations, they're working within the framework of the IAEA, and they're abiding by the NPT, they have every right to pursue the nuclear program, especially since this program began before the revolution and with the support of the United States. Billions of dollars have been invested in it, and tens of thousands of people have been trained to work in this program. So despite the fact that the Iranians may face some difficulties in the coming months and years, they feel that this is more important than that. And it is, despite the fact that the United States, as you pointed out, that they've tried to hurt the Iranian people, and the sanctions in the past have been directed at ordinary Iranians, the oil and gas sector, as well as the banking sector, both sanctions through the UN Security Council, as well as sanctions imposed by individual countries. These have been designed to hurt Iranian people, and in fact some people have died as a result in plane crashes, as well as a result of problems importing equipment for hospitals. But I think that when you look at the polls, the vast majority of the Iranians feel that this issue is very important, and this is a price that has to be paid.
Well, Alistair Crook, I see you nodding in agreement with what Mohammad Morandi is saying.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. I think the idea that these sanctions have somehow strengthened the hand of the West in talks and given it a better negotiating position is actually the converse to the truth. It's actually weakened its position. It's actually, and will have, united the Iranian people around their leadership. And certainly now, the idea of really starting down the path of negotiations has become so much more difficult after really the way in which the Brazilian and the Turkish initiative were removed from the agenda. And you asked me earlier, well, why are they going ahead in this direction? I think it's really actually very much to do with the fact of reasserting international power at a time of uncertainty. The desire to reassert, if you like, the leadership of the West as the leadership of the international community, and that's decided on sanctions, more or less come what may. But in practice, I don't think many, even in Washington, really feel that this is going to be effective, either in smoothing the path towards talks or indeed bringing about any change in policy in Iran. I think what Dr. Morandi said is absolutely right. It'll do the converse. In fact, it will actually make it much harder to bring about any change in policy because they have the support of the people. That's what's critical in this. It's not a wrong-headedness. They have the support of the Iranian people.
Well, certainly also the rhetoric coming out of Washington is much harsher these days. Well, on Sunday, in an interview on the American channel ABC News, the CIA Director Leon Panetta expressed concerns over the effectiveness of the recent sanctions and warned that Iran could produce at least 2 weapons.
The sanctions that were passed by the Congress this last week will have some additional impact. It could help weaken the regime. It could create some serious economic problems. Will it deter them from their ambitions with regards to nuclear capability? Probably not. I mean, we think they have enough low-enriched uranium right now for 2 weapons. They do have to enrich it fully in order to get there. And we would estimate that if they made that decision, it probably would take a year to get there, probably another year to develop the kind of weapon delivery system in order to make that viable.
Well, in response to the CIA chief's warning, the Iranian president held a numerical comparison.
Are they really frightened of a couple of bombs? How come? They've got 20,000 bombs in stockpile, and then they indicate they are really frightened of 2 bombs? For example, the US government threatened us with nuclear bombs. What change did that bring? Was it in their advantage or their disadvantage? The answer is very clear. The most stupid thing is the stockpile of nuclear weapons.
Well, Janab Abdu, how much of this increase of harsh rhetoric against Iran has to do with the upcoming midterm elections?
Well, it has something to do with it has a lot to do with the midterm elections as it regards Israel. And that's a topic that we haven't touched on yet, and aside from Israel being a nuclear power. But I think that we have to sort of place this in the context of how the United States sees this whole issue. And as CIA Director Panetta mentioned, I mean, people in Washington aren't naive. They don't think that sanctions in any way are going to destabilize Iran. But I think that what the strategy of the administration is to apply enough pressure points, not one strategy being the only real solution, but to apply enough pressure points on Iran, sanctions being one form of this pressure, to try to negotiate with Iran over its nuclear program. And I'd like to sort of correct something Professor Morandi said about Iran complying with the IAEA. In fact, Iran has not been in full compliance with the IAEA. So I think that part of the United States and Western government strategy in trying to negotiate with Iran is to make sure that there is full compliance, to make sure that there is transparency on Iran's nuclear program, which in fact has not happened fully to date. And this is really one of the goals of sanctions. And, we've had sanctions for many years. And, so the United States is not really deluding itself that sanctions in and of themselves would in any way destabilize the state. And that's not really the goal. In fact, European governments now, there's a series of meetings this week in Brussels with the European Parliament to talk, for example, about Iran's gross human rights violations over the last year. And at these particular meetings, these violations and Iran's human rights record is going to be highlighted. So the Western states are pursuing many strategies, including sanctions, but not limited to sanctions.
Well, Mohammad Morandi, one of the main complaints of the Obama administration is that Iran refuses to export its low-enriched uranium until it receives on Iranian soil the low-enriched fuel. So why couldn't Iran make a concession in that sense?
Well, the Iranians, by accepting the declaration, the Tehran declaration, effectively removed that excuse, and the United States basically showed that it is not looking for a solution, and it is trying to increase tensions rather than solve the problem. The Tehran declaration, I think, is very revealing. The fact that the United States basically slapped the Brazilians and the Turks in the face because of their step forward in resolving the issue immediately after the declaration was signed, shows that the United States really isn't looking forward to better relations or to improving the situation or resolving the issue. And you can also add the fact that the United States recently, in its nuclear posture review, effectively threatened Iran with nuclear strikes, although Iranians don't believe that they'll ever carry that out. But it shows the hostility that exists in Washington, and basically Obama now in Iran is seen as another George Bush. I would like to correct what your previous guest said, though, that Iran is indeed in compliance with the IAEA regulations and the NPT. And Mr. al-Baradei, for example, he himself was very much against these sanctions. And it is interesting that no evidence whatsoever has ever been provided by the IAEA that the Iranian nuclear program is anything but peaceful, despite the fact that the IAEA is not a democratic body, and it is highly influenced by Western countries. It is in some ways it's similar to the UN Security Council. So despite the fact that it is not reflective of the international community, the board of directors, and that the chief of the IAEA is chosen basically by the United States and its allies, still there's absolutely no evidence to show otherwise. And also, with regards to human rights, I think that it is really the United States that has to answer for human rights, for all its violations in Iraq, for the crimes committed in Afghanistan, for the support of Israel and the murder of the people in the Mediterranean Sea who are trying to help the poor people of Gaza. The United States does not have a good record in Iran by supporting Saddam Hussein in his usage of weapons of mass destruction against the Iranian people. So the EU and the United States really don't have much to say when it comes to human rights.
Well, Alistair Crook, we can't talk about this issue, obviously, without considering the Israeli dimension to it. Now, how difficult it is for the US to try to maneuver this whole crisis while its biggest ally is a country that doesn't want to come clean and say bluntly what is its own nuclear capability?
Well, of course, that's a complication. It's a complication which, in fact, is undoing much of American policy. We saw that at the nuclear review process that has just finished in New York, where all of the states that were gathered there to review the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty argued that there had to be clarity about this in the Middle East. So clearly this is a fundamental issue underlying it. But I think what is also very clear is, if you like, the unwillingness of Western states to actually move to try and prevent conflict happening in this region. It's quite clear. We saw at the G8, Prime Minister Berlusconi said all states are talking about the possibility of Israel attacking Iran's nuclear facilities. Full stop. He doesn't say this should be condemned. We should act to stop it. We must do what we can to prevent that. He almost says it as if it's something that's a fact of life and these are the things that happen and we must all acquiesce to such a thing. So I think there is a very dangerous element. And I think what you quoted earlier from Mr. Panetta is an example of the danger. I mean, shall we put it politely and say he was extremely economical with the truth in that statement? Of course, Iran has low-enriched uranium. It has every right to that. So does Japan. So do other states. The question that he mentioned, if they decide to highly enrich, it could take 2 years. Well, the same is true, of course, for Japan. Question is Japan likely to make that decision? Is Iran likely to make that decision? So it was really much a great economy with the truth. And the danger is, where does that lead the West and the United States? Sanctions are not effective. All of these pushings and proddings that Ms. Abdo just mentioned that are taking place in human rights are not likely to succeed. So where do they go then? Is there no other option but further coercion, military strikes being possible? Is that where they're heading? Have they considered the consequences of that? Because unless they can pull this back and engage with Iran seriously, perhaps on the terms that Brazil and Turkey have outlined, then we're heading to very dangerous waters.
Okay, and Genevieve Abdou, just briefly, do you think this unwillingness shown in the West to avoid a military confrontation also exists in Tehran?
Well, I think that the United States doesn't want a military confrontation. And as you mentioned, Hoda, earlier, there are domestic considerations. Of course, it's no secret that elections in this country mean that candidates running for elections need the vote of Jewish Americans, and Israel is basically given the United States a deadline and has done so for the last year or so. That they believe that Iran will develop a nuclear weapon, and Israel has said very pointedly that they're not going to live with the situation. So the United States is in a difficult position, and I think that what the Obama administration hopes to do is to avoid a war in the Middle East and to try to bring Iran back to the negotiating table. Obviously, sanctions probably is an impediment to bringing Iran back to the negotiating table, but on the other hand, I think the administration feels that there are few options left in order to deal with the question of Iran's nuclear capability.
And Mohammad Morandi, my last question to you, but just briefly the answer. What is Iran likely to do over the next couple of months? Obviously, there will be no talks, according to the president, until at least the end of the summer, but what's ahead?
Well, the Iranians have always been at the negotiating table. The problem is that the United States want the Iranians to abide by their demands, and that is just not going to happen, either now or in the future. The Iranians in the coming months are willing to continue negotiating, as they've done in the past with the Brazilians and the Turks, which was very successful. But the problem is that the United States is trying to create further tensions. And if they do so, the Iranians have no option but to respond in kind, and that will be a demand of the Iranian people who support the program. So if you just look at the map, you'll see that by hurting the United States, they're effectively hurting themselves, because Iran is the key to the region. It is the most powerful country. It is center to the region itself. And it is a country that has the Islamic Republic has the popular support of its people, and the program itself has the popular support of its people. So the only way forward really is for the United States to step back and rethink its policies towards Iran. The last 3 decades have been utter failures, and the only way forward for rapprochement is for the United States to become more realistic and to respect other countries.
Well, thank you very much. We have already reached the end of the program. Alistair Crook in Beirut, Mohammad Morandi in Tehran, and Genevieve Abdu in Washington. Thank you for taking part in this program. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. We welcome your comments and suggestions. Please email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.